You're listening to Science Coast with Mallory Havens and
Chris White.
And today our guest is
Ryan Hooper.
Hey, Ryan, can you tell us what you do at Lewis University?
Well, yes, I'm associate professor of physics in the physics department, and I'm formally trained as a high-energy particle physicist, but my current research portfolio spans particle physics, the physics and science of sports a little bit, as well as aviation and general relativity, a variety of different things.
Yeah, so once again, I'm surrounded by physicists.
Yay! You are
Yay!
so lucky. So lucky. It sounds like you're an all-purpose physicist.
I do like to dabble in a lot of different things, just based on interest, right? And it's like in a given week, I'm like, oh, this is interesting. I want to dabble in this.
And in your younger days, when you weren't being a physicist, you did play sports.
That is correct, yes. A lot of sports.
And you still have an enormous interest in sports.
Yes, very much so. I grew up, my dad was a huge baseball player and fan, and his family was. And so I grew up in a baseball-rich family, so that was like the main focus. And I'm an only child as well, so it was like at some
all
level,
the attention.
I'm like, really have no choice.
And for those of you who are listening, Dr. Hooper actually has a video, Lewis University video, about the spin of a baseball and how it impacts the trajectory of the ball. And it is the #1 watched video at Lewis University.
Yahoo!
Yay! So we thought
Did you get paid for it yet? Like from your millions of views and followers?
Do you get residuals?
Yeah, I think Christine gives me snacks from your office like every time I walk up there.
I told her to stop that.
Yeah, like little Twix bars. So to me, that's amazing. That's
all right. I'm gonna have to have a conversation with Christine. All right. So today we wanted to lean into that and talk a little bit more about the science of sports. And there's an awful lot of science that goes into soccer, volleyball, baseball, football, all of the major sports. There's a significant science component, even swimming. So Dr. Hooper, how did you start? Well, when you get into the science of sports, like how did you get into it? How did you start dabbling your toes in it?
Well, my father has he was a huge baseball fan and player, really good at it. If the stories are all true, he threw into the 90s as a pitcher, 95 miles an hour or so, thereabouts. So he was a big baseball person. And then growing up with him, and he also has had a bit of a engineering background, so he has a little bit of a science background. So early on, discussions around the dinner table involved, well, I know I can make the ball do this, right? How? Why? So it naturally went into the engineering and a little bit of and then into the physics of the flight of the baseball. I think it also helped that in 5th grade, I read a book on nuclear power plants, and I knew at that point I wanted to be a physicist. So I'm one of those weird people.
Nuclear-powered baseball.
Let's go.
This reminds me of like a sitcom montage thing where the dorky kid comes in and goes to play pool and does all the like math calculations that they display in the air and then like nails it and is the pool shark in the hall.
I'm not sure it works that way, but
wait, are you sure?
Well, I think that there's the science of sports, but I think one of the things they also tell athletes is don't think in the moment. If you're trying to think too much while you're actually performing, it degrades your ability. What you need to do is just intuit the science. You have to learn the science, understand, so that you react in the moment as opposed to thinking about the baseball in the moment. So that's my take on it.
So it becomes intuition.
Yes. So you have to study in advance so that it becomes second nature.
And study in sports language is called practice and drills. And they can be quite...
What do they call it? Physical memory? Is that what they say?
Muscle memory.
There's
a level of muscle memory, but based on my experience of playing baseball as well as other sports, it's I always describe it as you can mechanically practice something and it looks mechanical, but if you practice it enough, it's if you believe in the model of a human brain as a neural network, right? You've at some point you've programmed and trained the neural network to see the pattern in some sense the moment it emerges, and you already have a good sense of what the solutions need to be for the problem at hand.
And I think you've just described hitting a baseball.
Exactly. Yes.
That's the solution. Bat hits ball.
Yeah.
Well, I think that the scientific analysis, has suggested that
There's not enough time.
there's not enough time.
Yep.
That literally the batter has to make the decision as to where they're going to put the bat and how they're going to put the bat. When the ball is maybe 10 yards away from the pitcher's
it's
hands,
something like that.
it's
But
really early.
I mean, obviously, it's a function of how fast the ball is moving, and if it's moving faster, you don't have as much time. But exactly, it's not like you decide where to put the bat in your body when the ball is literally 3 feet in front of the plate. You actually have to make that decision.
You meet the ball where you expect it to be.
Expecting it to be. That's right. Based on, again, just hours and hours and hours of training and seeing a ball in flight, and then eventually seeing the ball in different types of flight because the pitcher's doing different things to it. And it really is. I think a good analogy is it very much is like training a neural network system to know what the solution looks like before it actually happens. Right.
I feel like it reminds me of evolution, where two organisms might be competing with each other. So let's say like a pathogen and somebody fighting it. So if the pitcher is the pathogen, they're trying to get the ball to the catcher without interference from the immune system, the batter, and the batter's trying to learn about the pathogen. But of course, the pitcher keeps changing it. So it's new and different each time.
And this
Look,
is
I can relate it to science too.
I think that's a good analogy. That's part of the those of us who are avid baseball players or sports fans. It happens in all sports, but especially baseball. We talk about the game within the game, right? Chris is nodding his head because he understands exactly what I'm saying. And Mallory, I think you're absolutely right. It's like, okay, in this pitch count, statistically speaking, I should get a fastball. So I'm gonna kind of put my chips down on. I'm attacking the fastball in this count. Let's say it's like 2-0 or 3-0. And the pitcher's the pathogen generator, shall we say, right? Is like, well, I don't have many choices here. I have to just throw this one out here because I need to get possibly a strike, right? And it very much is. So that is very much sort of a higher level, shall we say, almost an active cognitive thing that batters will think about. But Chris, you're absolutely right, and I tell all my, because I coach baseball, and I tell all my players and my kids, think when you're out of the box. But when you get into that box, shut your brain off, and then let your instincts just react to the scenario.
Well, I learned that from Bull Durham. Sorry, no, that's just a little bit of a joke there.
No, it is. Don't think you can only hurt the team.
That's right. Don't think. I think that was just the advice that the catcher gave. Don't think.
Mm-hmm.
But but everything that I've been learning as a scientist also says the same thing. You don't have time to process. You just have to react in the moment.
Yep.
So I was also wondering if there were specific examples for people who aren't super familiar with, with athletics and sports and haven't necessarily played. Where would you suggest they look when they're watching a sporting event to see a particular scientific concept in play?
Well, I think you watch just about any MLB game these days, and if let's say a batter just hits an absolute bomb very quickly, they're going to give you sort of the initial conditions on the ball leaving the bat, like they call that the exit velo, right? The exit velocity. Sorry,
I appreciate that clarification.
Exit velocity. Right.
Could have been a velociraptor. Don't know.
Yeah, right. I'm just.
We'll get to those later.
Yeah,
That's a new variation on baseball.
You jump into those colloquialisms like exit velo, right? You talk with the baseball people; they understand exactly what that means. Well, I'm a physicist, so I would argue maybe not exactly what it means, but you'll see, they'll talk about how many miles per hour it came off the bat, and also more importantly, what angle it came off the bat relative to horizontal. Right, and I think that with the technology we have nowadays, that's ubiquitous, right? It's amazing how often that shows up. So you're essentially seeing the initial conditions of effectively a projectile motion problem that we talk about in physics all the time, right? And I think that's fascinating to have that access to that information.
And what I've found is that the perspective of the trajectory of the ball is different if you're in the stands than if you're on the field. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things to look for potentially is, for example, how a player positions themselves. The easiest one for me is when a catcher, if there's a pop-up, so the catcher is behind the batter, and then the batter hits the ball like straight up into the air, and then what the catcher is supposed to do is turn so that they face the other direction.
Yes.
And maybe you could finish the story then.
Yeah. So we at the beginning of this, we kind of talked about my YouTube video on the spin of the baseball, and this is a clear example of the spin of the baseball having a kind of a backwards effect relative to what you'd expect. So the reason why a catcher does that is because when the ball comes off the bat and goes straight up, the spin that it has, once it turns over and comes back down, the magnus force actually will tend to push the baseball towards the pitcher's mound. So the catcher will turn his or her back, and they should also probably move out towards the pitcher's mound a little bit, such that when they're receiving the ball is coming into them. It's into their perspective instead of basically going behind them. And it's a weird effect, but it's true. I'm an old catcher, so this absolutely is true. I can tell you that this is exactly true.
And you have to wait for it to come to you.
Yes.
So they should turn their back to the pitcher?
Correct.
Okay, and then like walk towards the pitcher.
Well, what I teach anyway is you if it's straight up, you turn your back. Actually, before you turn your back, you take a few hard steps out towards the pitcher's mound. Then you turn around.
Okay.
And then you adjust, but the ball should, in some sense, be now in front of you.
Right.
And be coming into you as if you're like catching a fly ball in the outfield, which is more natural. That's easier to handle. Then basically the ball is over your head and the ball is running away from you and you're trying to catch it. That's really difficult.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So the trajectory of the ball, which is non-intuitive, is that the batter hits it up. It looks like it's going to go out of play backwards, but then instead of continuing, so it starts going backwards towards the out of play area, and then on its trajectory back down comes back towards the field of play.
Yes.
That's crazy. I don't believe in this physics stuff.
Well,
if it gets a little warmer, I can take you outside and hit one of those for you, and you'll believe it when you try to catch it. Trust me.
Yeah, I was always an infielder, and so when I had to go play some outfield, it was actually a very humbling experience.
Yep.
As the trajectory of the ball is very different in the outfield than it is on the infield. But the other thing is I guess I lost my train of thought completely here.
I can't help you. I don't know where you were going.
Yeah, I don't just on a total blank. Anyway, so what would you recommend is maybe some areas where people can start studying science of like baseball or sports?
Well, I'm a big fan of the major league sports database that they're compiling now, right? You can go in and just do like we did in that one analysis with my student. It was really just a simple grab some rate data and just start seeing some trends. See, what if this occurs, does it lead to this, and so on and so forth. I think, let's see, also, I also find interesting in watching football now, right, they actually do a level of a stat cast on just the kinematic parameters of some of these athletes and just how quickly they can get up to 20 miles per hour. And I also find it interesting, I don't know a lot about the analysis, but I find it interesting where somebody makes in football a really interesting catch, and they'll attach some sort of catch probability to that occurring, right? So I think there's some big data analytics associated with that, which I think people could be interested in. It's something you can just kind of look at and you're like, hey, I watched this play. It looks like it was very difficult to achieve, and you kind of correlate that to if the broadcast gives you like that catch probability. I've seen that pop up more and more in football. I mean, I think that's kind of interesting.
I have a quick question. So if you compare like the football player of yesteryear to today, or the baseball player like Babe Ruth era to today, I'd say the physicality and the ability has increased so much. I don't know if you agree with that, but if you look at like the size of your average player and how fast balls are being thrown and hit, so what do you guys think accounts for that?
I think a lot of what Ryan was talking about, where they have analytics and they train players in a different way today than they did in the past. And with football players, they're just bigger and stronger. If you were to, list in a table the sizes and weights of the offensive line for a football team from the 1950s versus today, you would go, oh.
It's amazingly different.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And the amount of training that people go through. The question is would Babe Ruth be able to hit modern pitching? And that's a question that I think a lot of people ask.
They used to smoke on the field.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
At a minimum.
Yeah.
So the spin rates, the brake, all kinds of little parameters are different. And the question then, I know that it's an intellectual question. It's not a real question. Is would Babe Ruth have been able to make the adjustments that modern players make to modern pitching? It's an age-old question that nobody knows how to answer.
So science has improved sports.
Yeah, and well, it's changed sports, because one of the questions I was going to ask is, with all of this analytics, if you really are just playing a numbers game, does it take away some of the fun? And in baseball, the money ball and the whole notion of scouting and what do you look for in a player? Well, if it's all just reduced down to some statistics, is that still fun? Where's the enjoyment of the game when it just becomes a statistical analysis? What's your opinion?
I see the danger in that, because I think playing these things, especially from the standpoint of our kids and the youth, you get a lot more out of doing these things than just wins, right? I like to win, but I coach 9 and 10-year-olds, and I try to emphasize that our main goal for you is to train you to become better citizens and representatives of your community. That's
team players.
That's goal number one. So I back to your question. Yes, I being a numbers person, I like diving into the analytics, but I can definitely see where being too obsessed about the statistics and the numbers and, shall we say, the hard science of it can detract from, shall we say, the love of the game and just sort of enjoying the process as a human being.
For me, the best example is the shift in baseball.
Yes.
Where because of analytics, because of TV, because of recordings, you can go through and look at every baseball that's been hit by a particular player and then chart out exactly where those balls typically go.
To a high probability.
And so then you can basically say that less than 5% of the time the player hits the ball in this area, so we don't have to have any fielders there. 80% of the time the ball goes this direction, therefore we're going to reposition our players to be where statistically this player hits the ball. And then that's an example of what I'm referring to.
Yeah,
and it's a very, Major League Baseball outlawed the shift this year, this past year, in some sense in response to that, to try to make the game more enjoyable for the crowd.
But my counter to that, and I get frustrated by exactly that scenario. I go, all right, so you're an elite hitter technically. Well, and you're an elite athlete if you're playing at that level. You are by sort of definition. So why don't you make an adjustment to offset the adjustment that's being made against you? And in sports, we often talk about making that adjustment. There's that in football, you'll hear coaches talk about, all right, and we need to make that halftime adjustment. And in baseball, there's many types of adjustments. There's like overall game adjustments. Heck, there's even at-bat adjustments that you have to make. And there's pitch adjustments that even a pitcher and catcher will do. So my counter to that is, and I know it's maybe not sexy, but I'm like, you know what? If you're a lefty, figure out how to be really good push bunter down the third baseline.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
I'm like, wait a second. You're an elite person to taking a bat and hitting a moving projectile.
Right. If they're going to take the third baseman and put them at the shortstop, and if they're going to take the shortstop and put them on the other side of second base, just lay it down the third baseline and run to first.
Exactly.
See, it's like they banned evolution as opposed to just letting the other side evolve back.
Yeah.
That's an interesting. Yeah. At some level. Yeah, right. Well, they're making the batter. They're not forcing the batter to evolve.
Right.
They're like, okay, we're gonna adjust the defense for you. I don't that I find that to be kind of cheap.
Yeah,
to me.
for sure.
That's kind of a cop out. I'll be honest. I don't like that.
And with that, the views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are the speaker's own and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of Lewis University. The material and information presented here is for general information purposes only. The Lewis University name and all forms and abbreviations are the property of its owner, and its use does not imply endorsement of or opposition to any specific organization, product, or service. This podcast was produced in the WLRA podcast studios at Lewis University. Visit lewisu.edu for more information about Lewis University. You've been listening to Science Coast with Mallory Havens and
Chris White.
our guest,
Ryan Hooper.
Thanks.
Bye.